I think high performers, not always, but high percentage of top performers, at least in this industry, have more of a selfish nature to them, right? It's about them, only about them. And a lot of times they're not really focused on the big picture. I think normally, a lot of times when you see the middle of the pack consistent performers, they perform individually, but they also bring a team dynamic and help. They're the ones that are always volunteering to do, the stuff that they don't get paid for. They're always willing to help a fellow teammate. They're always willing to help a new sales associate that's just coming on board. And so you see those leadership traits a lot more in that middle of the pack to upper end, more so than just the top performer in most cases.
If you change the incentive, right, you change the outcome. And when the incentive is, let's just rack up all these deals, and at the end of the month, it's going to be who's got the most on the board, right? That changes the way in which we engage with people. But if you have somebody who isn't so driven for those results, they can put their time into investing into other people, which is so interesting to think about in hindsight. As you were talking there, I'm thinking, yeah, the people in the middle are the glue, right, that hold the team together, which is so important. All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle Podcast. Now, I'm incredibly excited to sit across this table from this digital leader here today because we're going to learn a couple lessons. Some of these lessons are going to be what it's like to have patience in a role that's presented to us, how the trajectory of our life might be changed by a simple conversation, and so much more. Today, I've got Kelly Alston, the market president of Mills Auto Group, here with me, man. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great. Appreciate you having me.
So Kelly, I heard that once upon a time, you were given a piece of advice where someone said, just give it a year. Talk about how that simple suggestion kind of changed the trajectory of your professional life for me.
Absolutely. So I started selling cars part-time while I was in college, and it was simply just going to be a resume builder. And I was getting a degree in finance. And my whole game plan was to get into banking, go back to New York, which is where I'm from, work on Wall Street as an investment banker. And when I went in to resign from my part-time sales position, when I was getting ready to graduate, the VP of the company decided to come down and take me out to lunch and have a conversation with me about really considering the automotive industry as a career. And, we had a great lunch, had a great conversation, and, he convinced me to give it 1 year to see where it took me. And, that turned out to be a very pivotal conversation that helped me make probably what I would consider the best decision I could have ever made.
How is your mindset when you come back from that conversation? Someone just took you aside, put the time and effort to say, hey, Kelly, I see something in you, right? I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but just give me a year and see where you're at. How did that feel when you left that conversation?
It made me feel valued, because here I am. I'm not, a high level manager or anything in the company. I am a part-time salesperson. And, for someone, and at that time I'm 22 years old, to sit across the table from me, very successful person, sit across the table from me and say, look, you've got what it takes. Give it a year. Let's see where it takes us because I see it in you. So, I left that conversation, with a lot of confidence. And it really helped propel me to understand that, I could really do something special.
So what happens in that year?
So in that year, I started off selling cars full time, did really well, started being handed some leadership stuff amongst the salespeople. And then 10 months in, I got promoted to finance manager.
And so part of that maturation process or that ascension through the organization means, first of all, you're a pretty badass salesman. If you're being asked to be in a position of leadership, help coach up the team, now you're a finance manager. What is the process and responsibilities of a finance manager that are a little bit different from the sales process? What's that look like?
Oh, it's probably the second most important position in the whole dealership. You're responsible for cash flow. So, one, getting the customer approved, contracting them, disclosing all the, federal documents on the loan and everything like that, as well as you're responsible for generating income from selling products such as warranties and insurance. And then you got to make sure the money gets into the cash register, as well as make sure the car gets properly registered with DMV. So it is a very detailed and very intense position.
And how did you kind of fall into that? Because I know that you had some finance, I would say, passion right before we
Yeah.
started the sales position. So does this naturally the ascension for you? And you're like, hey, this is my element where I'm doing all of it?
Yeah. And you know what? It was the path that the company had. That was like the second step. That's your first step into management. So it was more their career path. And I learned a lot. And it was a very tough position, and it was a very tough transition initially going into it for me because it required a lot of detail, and I wasn't a very naturally detailed person at that stage in the game.
And how did we become that more detailed person? Was it out of necessity, or you just recognize that
Uh,
this is my unlock, my level up that I'm going to
it
be kind of
it
going
was
after?
out of necessity. So funny story. Um, my paperwork was terrible. My DMV paperwork was terrible, and I had a title clerk who I frustrated to no end. And she actually went to the general manager and gave him an ultimatum and told him either he was going to get rid of me or she was going to quit. That's how bad it was. And I'll never forget it. He pulled me in the office with her and he sat there and told me, he said, she just gave me an ultimatum. Either it's her or you. And I don't like ultimatums and I don't like being put in this position. So he made us work together. He told her, "You're going to teach him and he's going to listen, and the two of you will work together because but you both are too valuable to me for either one of you to go." And begrudgingly, she sat with me for hours and really taught me and trained me and really gave me an understanding of how I made her job so difficult. And I listened to her and I put the focus and effort into it, and you know what, got it fixed. Went from being one of the worst to one of the best as it relates to the paperwork.
Wow. And I'm sure that, you had to have a little bit of humility, right? Sitting down across the table with her saying, okay, I'm going to listen. I'm the finance manager here. I'm making sure these deals
Oh,
come through. This is just paperwork, but you had to focus on that when she got done with you.
oh my goodness, yeah. Because I had no idea that she felt that way to the point where she walked in and said, "Fire him."
Mm.
So that was a eye opening experience at that point.
Have you taken that nugget of wisdom, right, around healthy conflict when something's wrong, something's not right, having the conversation upstream rather than having it come downstream to the point where your manager, your boss is saying, I got an ultimatum here. It's either you or you. So you two need to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that experience, I think it really helped me to develop the insight to be able to look at things happening before it gets to that point so that I can insert myself and solve the problem before it becomes that type of problem. So, that experience definitely helped me a lot as it relates to especially getting into the roles that I went on to occupy.
Let's talk about that a little bit. So, finance manager, conversation with our title clerk, right? What's the next step up in our career and how do we get there?
So next step was sales manager. And, based on my performance in finance, they realized that I would be a very good sales manager. So they promoted me to sales manager. And my initial stint as a sales manager was very short. It was only like 2 months. And I did a really good job. And then this was around 2001 when the internet first became a thing in automotive. And we have been acquired by a big automotive consolidator, and they had this initiative that they were going to have platform internet sales directors, and they wanted us to create these processes and everything like that. So I get called back into the same VP's office that took me to lunch, and he sits down and he says, "Look, I don't know what this internet sales thing is, but you're the youngest sales manager in the company. Know you know what the internet is. I need you to figure it out." And so at this time, I'm 24 years old, and I'm handed this huge responsibility of creating the process, um, deciding who's going to be involved in it, and then having to roll this out to all of the general managers of 17 dealerships. So, you know, tall task. And I would say that one position prepared me for everything going forward, because I had to be creative, and then I had to go in and sell these top level professionals on my idea for how we're going to execute this process that they had never done before.
I need to know what these conversations look like. 24-year-old coming in and
Oh,
pitching the internet, right, to
oh
people who
yeah.
are seasoned. What is this like?
Oh, it was crazy, because no one really understood the concept, and I was very bold and ambitious, because the one thing I asked every general manager for was their number one salesperson. Not only was I coming in and say, "Hey, we're going to change the way we do things. This is going to be a whole new segment of business," but I went in and asked, and I said, "Look, I need your best person. I don't need your second best. I don't need your third best. I need the best person." And they all looked at me like I was crazy,
What was the rationale behind that?
because they would be able to touch more people on the internet than they would standing around waiting for that face-to-face contact. And if I remember correctly, I got 12 out of the 17 to give me their number one person, and the other five gave me their second and third best. And within a year, we were outperforming the normal salespeople in profit.
Let me wrap my head around this. First of all, with a little bit of hindsight, 2020, right? Totally makes sense what we're talking about. But this is a huge change agent activity. So
Huge.
how are we engaging in sales early 2000s around high ticket items like automotive, right? Like how are we pushing this, and how does the sales process look online?
So, and I'm figuring it out as I went along, right? But what I understood was these early adopters to the process, they wanted, the reason why they were going through the internet is because they didn't want the traditional sales process, right? They didn't want to spend the time in the dealership. They wanted to get as much done before they came in as possible. And they wanted to be a very short, seamless transaction. And I also realized that they would pay for it.
Mm.
That was the key. First couple of, when we first turned it on, I wanted to engage the customers myself. And I figured out real quick that these people just wanted to be taken care of. They were okay paying what they had to pay if they didn't have to deal with the headache and the hassle. And I also realized that most of them wanted prime premium merchandise. So they weren't trying to buy the, everyday vehicle. They were coming in looking at what was hot.
Highest intent buyers, best
Exactly.
resources, give me what I need and let me get out of here, right?
Exactly. And then once I had the data to show that, look, we're running higher gross profit on these deals than you're running in the traditional process, then they understood that they needed to have a better quality salesperson in this situation. And it it did so well that I was only in the job for 14 months.
I was going to say, they put you somewhere else real quick.
I sold myself out of that job.
Wow.
And it was two other interesting things. So one, they started inviting me to the general managers meetings. So I was one of the only non-general managers invited in these meetings, but they brought me in there to really put pressure on the general managers because they always wanted me to show my numbers versus everybody else's. And it put a lot of pressure on the general managers for performance, a lot of pressure.
Any negative pushback on this internet whiz kid who's coming in and showing us the hard data about the numbers? You know what I'm saying?
No, they wanted me, they really wanted me to come and spend more time in the store. So when it was time for them to have the conversation, it's kind of funny how automotive works sometimes. Sometimes you can earn your way out of a position because you make too much money.
Mm.
And that was the situation. They had no clue that we would be able to do what we did. So when they sat down and had a conversation with me and told me, okay, look, we want to put you back in the store, continue your progression. They literally told me I had to pick. I could go to any store. Every general manager wanted me to come work for them. So I had my pick of where I wanted to go work.
So how does young Kelly, because right now we're talking, right, you said you're a 24-year-old who goes into that general manager's office, right, 14 months later. So I'm guessing you're like 25, 26 at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the pick of the landscape. How do you keep your ego in check at that point in time to stay humble, but recognize you got so much more impact you can make?
Well, I think I've always been humble.
Mm.
And I think it really comes from my upbringing. So I've never gotten too high. I've never gotten too low. I always kind of stay in the middle. And I'm always trying to figure out, okay, what's the next step? So for me, I looked at, okay, where can I go have the greatest impact that will help me get to the next step quicker? So I think they were shocked when I picked the store to go to. I picked the worst store in the group to go back to.
Man, you're writing a hell of a story right now. This is so cool. So we
So,
picked the worst store to go to.
yep. And it just happened to be the store that I originally started selling cars in. And it was a Nissan dealership and it was struggling. And I picked to go back there because I knew I could go in there and make a difference. And I knew it would stand out. If I just went to one of the stores that was already doing well, probably could have helped them move the needle some, but it wouldn't have been as, recognizable at that point.
Yeah, we're looking for impact at this point in time,
Impact.
right? It's much easier to take a 30 to a 90 than take a 90 to 100, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So we're in the store now where we go to the Nissan store that we first started selling cars at, right? What is the next process of your career?
At that point, I'm focusing more on used cars to get that background and really go in there and take a strong leadership role. I had a great general manager at the time that really invested in really helped me work on the people piece because I was just a hard charging, take prisoners if I had to. Either you were going to be a hostage or a volunteer. Either one, it didn't matter to me. And really help refine that piece. And another pivotal conversation, I am driving these people to no end to get the results, and we're getting the results. And same VP comes back and has another conversation with me, takes me to lunch again, and he comes to inform me that my number one salesperson asked for a transfer because of me. And I had no idea.
What's the first reaction you hear when you say that? This has got to be him. This ain't me. You know what I mean? Like, why are you looking at me for this?
I'm like, what do you mean? And he explains to me that, you know what, the way I was communicating, it just wore thin. And, he told me something. He said, Kelly, you are talented enough that people will follow you because of who you are, not what you say or how you say it. And he encouraged me to go back and have conversations with all of my salespeople on how they really felt about me. Now, you want to talk about a humbling experience? That was a humbling experience because, you know, I'm thinking these guys love me because I'm helping them make so much money, but they tolerated me because I made them a lot of money. But this one person, the paycheck couldn't be big enough for them to continue to deal with me. And that changed my whole communication style.
I mean, at one point in time, right, we think that results are going to drive results, but the skill set of being a sales manager, being a salesman, right, does not correlate into the skill set of being a leader and getting the best out of people,
It
which is a
does,
huge maturation of process.
it does not. And I'm gonna tell you something. I've noticed the the top salesperson, the number one guy, usually doesn't make the best leader. It's usually the ones in the middle of the pack that end up being the best leaders and the best managers.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because I think high performers, not always, but high percentage of top performers, at least in this industry, have more of a selfish nature to them, right? It's about them, only about them. And a lot of times they're not really focused on the big picture. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that because there's a place for those performers, right? Um, and I think normally, a lot of times when you see the middle of the pack consistent performers, they perform individually, but they also bring a team dynamic and they're willing to help. They're the ones that are always volunteering to do, the stuff that they don't get paid for. They're always willing to help a fellow teammate. They're always willing to help a new sales associate that's just coming on board. Um, and so you see those leadership traits a lot more in that middle of the pack to upper end, more so than just the top performer in most cases.
Yeah, I mean the if you change the incentive, right, you change the outcome. And when the incentive is let's just rack up all these deals and at the end of the month it's going to be who's got the most on the board, right? That changes the way in which we engage with people. But if you have somebody who isn't so driven for those results, they can put their time into investing into other people, which is so interesting to think about in hindsight. As you were talking there, I'm thinking, yeah, the people in the middle are the glue, right, that
Mm-hmm.
hold the team together, which is so important.
Absolutely.
Man. So we've spent many years, right, in this space. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How has the industry changed? I mean, something that everybody who's going to be tuning in, watching, and listening to this episode is like, yeah, the automotive market went crazy from the pandemic forward. So, what are some of the big changes that we're kind of seeing on the other side of that world changing event that we all went through?
Well, I think we're going to see some really drastic changes. I think we're going to see a lot of manufacturers consolidating, especially with this EV situation. It's going to be interesting to see how it turns out with the new administration. Um, because if they get rid of these EV tax credits, that's really going to change a lot of things, and it's going to force some manufacturers to pivot on some huge investments they've already made in shifting drastically towards EV. So that's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays out in the next year or two.
Do you think that those legacy, this is kind of a question that's on the front of my mind. I currently, so I'm not going to be holding any punches here. I grew up in Detroit, like we talked about in our
Mhm.
original call, right? I've probably had maybe like 12, 13 cars to this point in my life. I recently, in 2022, hopped into a Tesla, a Model Y, right? Completely changed my entire perspective of the automotive industry.
Mhm.
Do you think, from your unbiased perspective, right? Do you think that Ford, all these other type of companies are going to be able to make the transition to the EV marketplace because the manufacturing isn't set up that way? They're having to re-engineer the entire businesses to be able to make money on these cars that they're producing.
It, it's going to be very tough. And see, the biggest issue is none of them are making money on these EV sales. They're losing big dollars because the investment is so great in R&D and everything for them to you know to develop these new products. And when you're fighting a Tesla that's been around for years, and let's face it, nothing's really changed with the car, right? So we can't, the legacy manufacturers cannot compete on price. I mean, he can just keep lowering it and lowering it because his cost basis is so much less than everybody else's. So it's going to be very interesting to see um, how they pivot in this situation, and then especially if the EV tax credit goes away, that plays into Tesla's hand and makes everybody else a lot less competitive.
Oh man, it's just interesting to think about how when we ignore something that seems so obvious in an industry like this,
Hmm.
before you know it, you're going to look and you're going to be surrounded by competition. You're not going to have a way out. I
Yeah.
mean, back in 2021, I first started looking into some of the vehicles from like Ford and Chevrolet. Chevy came out with the Chevy Volt, which unfortunately
Hmm.
started fires in people's garages.
Hmm.
The Ford Lightning came out, but they were selling those things in dealerships like 80,000 over MSRP. You know what I mean? So like these vehicles were so expensive that I just didn't think that there was a way for these people, these legacy automotive manufacturers, to navigate the changing landscape as quickly as they tried to. And it's just interesting to hear somebody's perspective who's like in it, like you are.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. It's concerning. It's concerning, but a lot of them are already starting to pivot and back away from, their hard stances on EV, and now hybrids are going to be really the way to go for more efficiency. I think you'll see a lot more hybrids and not as many full electric vehicles.
Man. So what are we thinking about the transition to a younger generation of young Kellys who are coming to work in the automotive space? How are you thinking they're interpreting the landscape right now, the opportunities that are in front of them? Have things changed over the years, or what's kind of your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, things have changed drastically, and they're going to have to continue to change. The automotive industry has always been a very time intensive business. You got to be there to make the money. So, one of the biggest detractors in our business has always been the hours, right? Working weekends, working late nights, and the younger workforce is more motivated by time than money, right? So, my generation, we would gladly trade dollars for time, right? If you paid me enough, I work as many hours as you wanted me to work. That is not this generation. They are not motivated by money. They are motivated by time and really want to be included, right? They want to be included. And that is a very drastic shift from what the traditional automotive business, has been. So definitely a transition.
I think about a term that I've tried to float in a framework I've tried to create here on the podcast called the instant gratification trap. We have a younger generation of people who have been slowly but surely conditioned by the things that we engage with through social media and the little device that's always with us, never outside of arm's reach, to look for things instantaneously. I order food, it'll be here in 20 minutes. I need a car, someone stranger is going to pull up in front of my house. I need XYZ, it'll be here tomorrow via Amazon. But when you think about creating a sustainable career in an industry like you have, talking 20 plus years of dedication and time, do you think we're going to hit a clipping point where this younger generation expects the promotions, the pay, the titles, but they just haven't put in the time that's necessary to actually ascend the same way that you did?
100%. I mean, I've experienced it. Um, it's funny. I think it was almost 10 years ago now. I had the brilliant idea that I was going to go recruit a bunch of kids directly out of college into the automotive industry. Um, Went down to Northwood University, brought back 5 kids, convinced 5 kids to come move to Charlotte, North Carolina to sell cars. And brilliant kids, you know, we did a great job with them, but it did not move fast enough for them. They, 6 months in, they wanted to be the general manager.
Mm.
So it was very interesting. It was eye opening, but definitely there is not the level of patience that I had to have matriculating through, um, and what most cases will be required to move through the ranks, because you know what, it's the automotive industry is a very complex landscape, and you don't learn it and master it in 90 days, 1 year. And every time you get promoted in a position, you're starting over and you got a lot to learn. And it takes a long time to master the skills necessary, especially to do it the right way. You know, to do it the wrong way, you can maybe move a little bit fast, but if you really are going to be effective in your role, it takes some time.
I feel like we heard that story growing up, right? There was the tortoise and the hare. It
Mm-hmm.
seemed like no matter how fast the hare wanted to run, it's always going to be losing that race to the slow and steady progression. And that element of patience is something that I think we really need to harp on a little bit more.
Yeah, and you know what? It didn't happen fast enough for me, right?
Interesting.
I always thought I was ready before I was ready. But I think it's a little bit more pronounced now. I thought I was ready after a year, right? Now it's 6 months, right? So it's definitely a big difference.
How have you seen? So we've talked about, your transformation, your maturation process, and being a leader and getting the most out of others, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've worked in a couple different areas and divisions inside the business. How have you thought about the differences in generations of leaders, right? I have a book here I love to bring into these conversations. I'm not sure if I brought this up last time. Gary V, social media, Gary Vaynerchuk, book 12 and a half, leveraging the emotional ingredients necessary for business success. Whole emphasis of this book is, in the future, leaders of great organizations who can build a following of people who are willing to go to war for the mission that everybody's on. It means you're going to not have to show up like Steve Jobs, who ruled like a tyrant and was a real hard ass, but more importantly, somebody who's skilled in the soft skills: compassion, empathy, kind candor, tenacity, curiosity. How do you kind of think about that changing of the guard from a skill set perspective to get the next or the most out of the next generation?
Absolutely. So, that's something that I'm working with our leaders on right now. We do a lot of leadership training, and you know, those soft skills are mandatory now because you have to have a different conversation, right? You have to have a different approach. You really have to take the time to know your staff on an individual basis to understand what makes this person tick. How do I get the most out of this one person? So there's not one message anymore for the staff. It used to be you could bring a bunch of people in a room. You can hit them with a couple of things, motivate them, wind them up, send them out, on a mission. Now, you can still do that, but 40% of the room is going to get it and 60% of the room is not. And you really have to focus in on an individual basis, um, and have all those soft skills. Listening and patience is huge. And you've got to be willing to answer the question of why, right? Because when I came along, you just did it because you were told to do it. Now, everybody wants to know the why behind it. And you've got to be willing to explain the why, but also skilled enough to explain it in a way that they get it and then they take it and run with it.
I'm going to share an example of one of my favorite leaders right now. This individual has been in the spotlight in the sports world, collegiate world over the last, I would say, year and a half. Deion Sanders, right? Coach at University of Colorado Buffaloes. There was a video I was watching one time and somebody was asking him, like, Deion, how did you become such a great leader? Right? You deal with so many young men who are from so many different backgrounds and families and cultures. How do you get the most out of all of them? And he said, well, I'll tell you what I don't do is come in and speak that one message because I'm only hitting a certain amount of my men. So what I have to do is spend enough time around everybody to understand what makes everybody tick. Keenan might be somebody I need to grab by the collar and have a real conversation with. Kelly might be somebody I need to pull into my office and say, hey, man, I haven't seen what you've been doing. I'm really proud of you. Let's keep working, right? You have to be able to attack the group from a different perspective as a leader. So who is one of your favorite leaders who you've drawn inspiration from?
So it's funny. Deion Sanders is probably the number one guy right now. Just seeing what he's been able to do from Jackson State and how quickly he's done it, and then with the character that he's doing it with. I think that's the one thing that a lot of people are not talking about. They talk about, you know, because he's a flashy guy, so he's got great one-liners, so you take all of that, right? But when you really peel back the onion and you see how deep and granular he gets with these kids, and then the character that he's doing it with, and he's not deviating. No matter what comes his way, he is not changing who he is and his way of doing it. So that's been a great example. Great example.
I mean, I just love how he's not coming across cocky. He's coming across as convicted, right? He's
One
like,
hundred
I
percent.
know who I am. So why do you think I'm going to give 2 cents to anybody's opinion? That's not me, dog. You know what I mean? I just love the way in which he carries himself. He's like just one of my all-time favorite leaders.
Yep. Authentic.
Authentic. Great word,
Hmm.
man. So here's a question for you. If we could go back in time, Kelly, right, to let's say 2000, 2001, and we're sitting in a room with you for 5 minutes, uninterrupted advice to help that younger version of Kelly navigate to become the person who sits in front of me here today, what advice would you give to him?
Oh man. One, I would tell him to be patient. Okay. It's not going to happen fast enough, but it's going to happen at the right time. Right. I had someone tell me one time, just because it's your time doesn't mean it's your turn. And that resonated. So one, be patient. Two, people will follow you for who you are more than what you do. So make sure who you are is in the forefront, and then what you do, people even love you more for that. And then the third thing is to really enjoy the process. Enjoy the process, because every step is going to be something that you are able to take with you to the next challenge that's going to prepare you for it.
Do you believe in fate?
I do, to a degree. I do.
To a degree. You know, my father, when I was growing up, he always he had a saying in our family. He said everything happens for a reason, right? Sometimes you get cut from the squad. Sometimes you lose the job. Sometimes you get a flat tire, but you never know what happens on the other side of that, right? And as I kind of sit here and think about the advice that I would give to my younger version of myself, it would be enjoy the journey.
Hmm.
You know, we spend so much time as high achievers thinking about, okay, I'm here. The next place I got to get to is there. And once I get there, the next place I need to get to is there. And we're always moving that goalpost, or that accomplishment turns into a horizon eventually. We're always chasing.
Absolutely.
And my biggest fear is that I'm going to get to the end of the race, 70-year-old, 80-year-old Keenan, and be like, wow, you really accomplished everything that you said you were going to, but guess what? You fucked it up because you didn't enjoy any of the steps that got us here today. You know what I mean? That's a tough balance.
It is. It is very tough balance, especially when you're driven, right? You're conditioned to what's next. One of the things that I've had to work on, I probably my biggest struggle. I've always struggled with recognition, giving recognition, and it's because it's something that I've never needed. Right? I've always been wired to just go get it, and I've always been more focused on my misses. I count my misses. I don't count my makes. And that's transitioned also into leadership too. And I've really had to try and focus in and give recognition, because a lot of people do need it, right? Um, and it pushes them further. It gives them fuel, to keep going. And I've had to work on it with my kids as well, right? Because I've got very high expectations for them. I've got high expectations for the people that I work with, and meeting my expectation is the qualifier, right? But a lot of times that deserves a good job, and I've had to condition myself to really point that out and focus on. If I have a kryptonite, that is my kryptonite, is giving recognition.
Man, you're talking about it with me too, man. It's there's a process, and I was talking to my girl about this the other night. It was like, it's interesting when you're a high achiever, you always want to accomplish more. And the stress that I give myself is I know deep down inside of me that I could be doing more. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but that's the voice in the back of my head. So every single day when I wake up, right, I need to crush the gym at 5:30 in the morning. I need to be good on all my conversations. I need to articulate myself well. I need to remember to do all the stuff around the house. I need to support my girl throughout the day emotionally and physically when she's here. And then if I do all those things, I come back to the baseline of saying, okay, today was a good day. But if you hear that from the outside, that sounds like a pretty fucking awesome day. You know what I mean? But it's the bare minimum for me.
Yeah,
And it's like, I'm just trying to stretch my boundaries to be a little bit more appreciative of the things that I do accomplish on a daily basis, because that sense of inadequacy, or that coming from that mindset of scarcity sometimes over a longer time horizon, man, can be a dangerous little equation for yourself.
it can, absolutely.
How do you think about accountability in your life?
Do you mean self accountability?
How do you think about accountability? When I say accountability, what pops into your mind first thing? Self accountability, accountability for others. What are you thinking?
Um, being responsible, whether it's uh, for my own actions or being responsible for the people who've entrusted their careers, right, in my hand, right, holding them accountable, but also being accountable to them, uh, to give them what they need in order to be successful. But I learned accountability at a very young age, very young age.
You got
My
a story for us?
my dad was Mr. Accountability. Um, very little got past him, and he had extremely high expectations. And once you showed what you were capable of, that was the floor,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the expectation. And you know, it he did not let anything fall through the cracks. It was, you were always on your A game, and he held you to task to what he expected you to do and what you were expected to do.
As you got older, did you start looking at that as not so much like a parental weight that they put on us? Because I'm sure as a young man, it's like, Dad, come on, I'm doing my best. It's like, I know you can do better. But when we get older with a little bit of perspective, it's really a blessing that somebody cared that much about us to hold us to a higher standard.
100%. I mean, I am forever indebted to him for that, because it truly made me who I am today.
Now, I'm a big sports guy, right? Played football, basketball. As you can see, my picture of Kobe over here. Can't always get the picture right. Baseball is my big sport. Played in college. I'm a big like Babe Ruth guy, right? Because he called his shot. I want you to call your shot over 2025, 2026. What are we looking to accomplish, Kelly?
Looking to, from a personal level, um, definitely looking to, one, improve from a fitness standpoint, right? That's kind of the mode I'm in right now. I'll be 50 in 2 years. So when I hit 50, I want to be in the best shape of my life. So that's one of the things. And then from a professional standpoint, just continue to grow, uh, myself, my skill set, but also continue to grow the business that I'm entrusted to lead. Maximize the opportunities. That's what I'm looking to do over the next 2 years.
So we have a tradition here on the podcast. Okay, what we do is we have our previous guest ask our current guest a blind question, and because you're talking about growth, I think this is a really important one. If you had a magic wand that had one magic wave in it, what would you wipe it towards or wand it towards, and what change would you hope it caused for your personal growth?
That's a good question. Um, what would I wave it towards for my personal growth? Um, Man, whoever asked that question, man, that's a deep one. What would I wave it towards for my personal growth? Um, I would wave it in order to freely give recognition.
I love that, man. You know, it's easy to understand why you're here on the podcast because you are the definition of heart and hustle, Kelly. We talked about your maturation process, how much you've grown in this role, how it felt for you when someone took you aside and said, just give me a year. And
Mhm,
look where we're at 25 plus years later, right?
mhm.
Doing our thing and still having a huge impact, man. I'm really proud of the individual who sits across from me here today, but also for you coming on and blessing the stage with me and talking about your heart and hustle, man. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
I appreciate you having me.